chosen. Lord, heavens above, I'm only human after all. I'm only human after all. Don't put the blame on me. Don't put the blame on me.
Great. Well, thank you. It's great to be here. And as we said, similar format to other days, I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes, hopefully no longer, because then we want to give you the opportunity to ask your questions. And the code for Slido is up there in the corner. But if you don't have your phone or if you don't want to use that, you can put your hand up at the end as well and ask in the more traditional method. But we're asking this question: how can we live in harmony in a world of competing truth claims? I come from the UK, as you might guess. I come from a city in the UK called Leicester. And Leicester's famous for at least a couple of things. It's famous for an event that happened a few years ago when our football team, against all odds, won the English Premier League, which brought me great delight, as it also did to most football fans around the world. But it is also famous for something else, and that is it's the first city in Britain to have what you might call an ethnic majority. That means there are more people living in Leicester who are not from a British background than are from a British background. Which also meant that as I grew up in that city, I was surrounded by people from all sorts of different ethnic and cultural backgrounds. And along with that, of course, many different religious backgrounds as well. Within a few minutes' walk of where I lived, you could go to a mosque, a temple, a synagogue, you name it, and you could probably find it in Leicester. Now, in a sense, Leicester was unique in being the first city to have an ethnic majority, but actually live in any Western city today, and the reality is we're surrounded by people of different cultural and religious backgrounds to ourselves. And if you think about it, that is very, very different to the culture that our grandparents probably grew up in, where actually the environment that they lived in would have been one where almost everyone would have shared the same worldview and belief system as they. So this question is particularly pertinent in our point in history in our part of the world, isn't it, in Western Europe, as we ask this question in an environment where we're surrounded by people who have different truth claims and different belief systems. How can we have harmony? And in a world where religious belief systems can sometimes lead to conflict, how can we have peace? That's the question that we're thinking about. And there are really several different ways that people have tried to answer that question. One way is to say, well, the way we have harmony and peace is that we just eradicate all truth claims. We eradicate religion. And of course, that was tried, wasn't it? Most famously last century in this very continent. The only problem was in trying to eradicate religion, an equally, if not more oppressive system was replacing it. And it seems very strange, if you're wanting to live in a world of harmony and peace, that you would do so in such a violent way as to try and eradicate or remove religion altogether. So most people probably wouldn't suggest that today. Other people would say, well, maybe we should say that all religious truth claims are basically the same. Basically, all religions are saying the same thing. I don't know whether this advert for Amazon was popular here in Switzerland. It certainly was popular in the UK. And it featured an imam and a Christian minister. And they met up in the advert and they talk together. You don't actually hear what they're saying. There's just music playing in the background. And then as they get up, they both hold their knees in pain because obviously they're such holy men that they spend all their time on their knees. And then as they depart, they both have an idea and they go to their smartphone and they order something, of course, on Amazon. And the next day, we see both of them receiving their gift from Amazon, and they've actually both ordered each other the same thing, a pair of knee pads. And the advert is basically saying this: if we want harmony in a world of different religions, buy Amazon. Well, maybe not quite, or maybe actually. But basically it's saying, look, let's all just live together. It doesn't really matter what religion you're from. It doesn't really matter what religion you follow. Let's just live in harmony together. We're all praying to the same God. We all really are believing the same thing. Now, the reason why the advert can work, of course, is that actually there is no speech in the advert. You don't hear what people are saying. It's much harder once religious people actually start saying things to hold that opinion that possibly we all believe the same thing. Because actually, just a cursory look at the religious claims around the world shows that actually they do make very different claims. Take the very basic question about God, for instance. Some religions say that there is one God. Others say that there are many gods. Others say that there is no God. Christianity talks about one God expressed in three persons, sometimes called the Trinity. But they're all very fundamentally different answers to the same question. So it would seem a little bit naive to just assume that all religions say the same thing when clearly they don't. We like to think that religions are fundamentally the same and only superficially different. But actually, if you look into them in any detail, you'll realize that they're fundamentally different and only superficially the same. Now, another way of looking at this is maybe to say, well, okay, on the outside, it looks like religions are different, but actually at their core, at their hearts, they're really the same. Maybe the illustration which is used most frequently in this regard is the illustration of the blind man and the elephant. I don't know whether you've come across this, but this was a favourite of my religious education teacher at school. And it basically says that there are some blind men feeding an elephant. One person feels its side and thinks it's a brick wall. One person feels its tail and thinks it's a rope. One person feels the leg and thinks it's a tree. And we'll stop with the body parts there. And they're all coming to different conclusions. And the illustration basically says, well, that's like religion. Religions are grasping at ultimate reality, and they're all coming to different conclusions. But it's really the same ultimate reality anyway. Now, I want to suggest there are at least two problems with that illustration. The first problem is that actually it's quite arrogant. Because the person who is giving the illustration claims to be the only person in the story who has seen that it's an elephant. In other words, what they're saying is all the religious people in the world are blind. They haven't really grasped ultimate reality, but I can see what everyone else can't. Which potentially is quite arrogant. The second problem is that actually all of the people in that story, they weren't all correct. They were actually all wrong, weren't they? Because it wasn't a tree or a rope or a brick wall, it was an elephant. None of them had got close to what ultimate reality actually was. So whilst it might be a popular illustration, I would suggest it falls down. It's too simplistic to simply say that all religions are basically the same. And if you try and boil down all religions to their lowest common denominator of agreement, you end up with something that is so vague, it's almost not worth talking about. So here's a third option that people would give, and that is to say that all truth is therefore relative. We talked about this a little bit on Monday night, if you were at the event. The postmodern thought that basically says that there's no such thing as absolute truth. All truth is relative, and what is true for me is not necessarily true for you. And that relativizing of truth, I would suggest, is a particularly popular idea over the last 20, 30 years in the West. But there's, again, at least a couple of problems with it. Firstly, it is potentially internally inconsistent. You see, when you say there is no such thing as objective or absolute truth claims, the problem is that you appear to be making an objective and absolute truth claim in the process of trying to deny them. It seems to be suggesting that that truth claim, uniquely, is absolute. So it's internally inconsistent. But secondly, I want to suggest that none of us actually live this way consistently in practice. In the area of religion, we might say that all truth is relative, but actually, even in this university, and the universities in this city, we wouldn't necessarily think that, particularly if we're studying maths. The postmodern idea doesn't work in every discipline, does it? And certainly it doesn't work in our experience of life. Because sometimes when we look around our world, we want to say that actually things like inequality and injustice, things like anti-Semitism and racism are absolutely wrong. And it's not just culturally wrong for us because we've decided that that is the case, but that they are wrong. And even if other people live in a culture where they believe that they're right, that actually we should engage them in discussion because actually it is wrong. So relativizing truth potentially doesn't work in practice. So the question, therefore, is why, if this postmodern view of truth doesn't actually work in practice, is it so popular? And why does it remain popular today? And I want to suggest that one of the reasons why it remains popular is this: that many of us are deeply suspicious about the idea of truth, and particularly exclusive truth. And in particular, we're suspicious of the way that exclusive truth claims could be used. Listen to the French philosopher Michel Foucault. He said this: "Truth is a thing of this world. It is produced only by virtue of multiple forms of constraint, and it induces regular effects of power." In other words, what Foucault is saying is that truth is used to control and constrain, and it's used as a power play. And because of what Foucault is saying, many of us are very suspicious of truth because we can see how truth can be used, or rather abused. And as a result, we don't like the idea of exclusive or objective truth because we could see how it could be dangerous, as the poll at the beginning suggests. So the question then is there an exclusive truth claim that isn't dangerous? Could there be a possibility that there is such a thing as objective truth, but not an arrogant or proudful one? And I wanted us to look for a few minutes at the exclusive truth claim of Jesus. Because actually, in one sense, when you look at the person of Jesus as represented in the New Testament documents, Jesus makes claims that are incredibly exclusive and on the surface incredibly arrogant, if you think about them at any length. Listen to some of them. Jesus said, "I am the truth." He didn't just claim to say that he had the truth. He said that he was the embodiment and the personification of truth incarnate. He said, "I am the only way to God the Father." He claims to be the only one who could forgive people's sins. He claims to be the judge of the earth, despite the fact he'd already told his followers not to do any judging themselves. And he claimed that even though heaven and earth would pass away, his words would not pass away. On another occasion, he claimed to predate a religious leader, Abraham, who had lived and died 2,000 years before, a claim to eternal nature. And he then took the Jewish name of God, the I Am, as revealed to Moses, and he used it repeatedly to refer to himself. And he did so explicitly that people clearly got the point, because some of them tried to stone him then for blasphemy. So here is Jesus making some of the most arrogant and exclusive claims that anyone has ever made. The kind of claims that if I was to make today, you'd probably send me back to England packing quite quickly, because it would be incredibly arrogant for me to say them. Yet here's the thing. If I was to ask you, what is the first word that comes to your mind when you think of the historical person of Jesus? For most people, it isn't the word arrogant or proud. And yet, how is it that the person who makes the most arrogant claims in history isn't generally regarded as arrogant? Well, let me just briefly look at one last claim of Jesus together. This is in Mark's account of Jesus' life, the earliest of the biographical accounts. And these are the words of Jesus. And he said this: "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." Jesus says, he is the Son of Man. Now, some people think the Son of Man is simply a claim to Jesus' humanity, whereas the Son of God is a claim to his deity. That's not actually true, because in the Old Testament book of Daniel, the Son of Man refers to the powerful king who is coming to judge all of history and who has all authority. So when Jesus says, "I'm the Son of Man," that's not a kind of humble claim. He is saying he is the one who has all authority and all power over all of history. But he says he is the Son of Man, but he did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. So on the one hand, Jesus is saying, I am the one who has all authority and all power, and yet he says, what have I come to do with that? Not to be served, but to serve. And ultimately, as we see in the rest of the biographical accounts, that looks like Jesus going to a cross and not killing his enemies, but dying at the hands of his enemies and for them. Now, can I say, this is so radical, because Jesus is saying, True power and true authority is demonstrated in sacrificial service and love. And that is so unique. Can I say that is different to any other truth claim, any other view of God that has ever been represented in history? This is not Zeus. Zeus doesn't come to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. When normally we think about gods who use their power and authority to get other people to worship and serve them. But here is Jesus saying, I have come to use my authority to serve others and to give myself for others. So here in Jesus, we find absolute truth claims demonstrated in humble service. So therefore, I want to suggest that in Jesus, we find a truth claim that isn't dangerous and that isn't a power play. A truth claim that's attractive and that's worth investigating. But just before we finish, one other thing to say, and that is this. Maybe your question today is this. Okay, maybe Jesus isn't arrogant, and maybe his truth claims are not a power play, but would becoming a follower of Jesus mean that I would have to become arrogant? And maybe that's how we perceive people who are religious. Because at the end of the day, if we think about religion, this is normally how we think religion works. We normally think religion works by saying, here are things that you should do, rules, rituals, and regulations that you should follow. And if you follow them well, then you're in, and one day you might go to heaven, or get rewarded, or get reincarnated as something good, like a dog. Or if you don't follow the rules, then you're out and you'll go to hell, or you'll be punished, or you'll be reincarnated as something bad, like a cat. Sorry, I also have another controversial view, that I don't like cats. But you know how it works. You do good and you're in, you do bad and you're out. Now, if that is how religion works, if I say, I believe that I am accepted by the God of the universe and I'm going to heaven, that sounds very arrogant, doesn't it? Because basically what I'm having to say is, I am better than you. And the reason why I am accepted is that I have done something that you haven't done. So it leads potentially to pride, or conversely, it leads to despair, because I say, well, I'm no better than you, and actually I'm aware of my failings, and therefore how could God ever accept me? But either way, pride or despair, religion can lead to one of both, couldn't it? Yet how unique is the Christian faith? Because Jesus says, actually, he hasn't come that we do things for him, but he has come to do something for us. The Christian faith is not spelt D-O, it's spelt D-O-N-E. It's what Christ has done for us. You might say it's not karma, we get what we deserve, but at its heart is a message of grace. We get what we don't deserve. The heart of the Christian message is an acceptance with God based on what Jesus done through his death and resurrection, not on what we do through our religious observance. Now, if that is true, that to follow Jesus means accepting his grace and forgiveness, what does that lead to? Can I suggest it leads to not pride or despair, but to humility and joy? It leads to humility because actually the first step to becoming a follower of Jesus is not to say, I am better than you and therefore God should give me a pat on the back. But actually it's to say, I am no better than anyone else. I have failed and I need God's forgiveness. By the way, that's why it's really hard to become a follower of Jesus, not because there's something we need to do, but precisely because there is nothing that we could do, and it takes humility to recognize our failings, doesn't it? But it doesn't lead to despair because actually, if God is willing to accept us on the basis of what Jesus has done, then it should lead to joy. Because I know that even though I'm a failure, God loves and accepts me in Christ. And I have complete assurance of that because of what he's done. So if you're fearful that becoming a follower of Jesus should lead you to become some kind of arrogant, morally superior, self-righteous snob, can I say you probably potentially haven't understood the heart of what it means to follow Jesus. I've got a friend back home who is quite a convinced atheist, and we often meet up for meals to kind of chat about life and about questions like this. And I remember one meal we were having together, and my friend said to me, he said, my problem with Christians is they're also arrogant. So I said, well, that's very interesting. I'm a Christian. Do you think I'm arrogant? And he said no. Now, he had to say that because I was going to buy lunch. So then I said to him, well, what about your wife? She's a Christian. Do you think she's arrogant? And he said no. And I thought, well, he had to say that too because I'd have told her. And then I named a few other people that he knew that were also Christian. And he said, well, no, they're not. And then I said, can you actually name me one Christian that you've met that you think is like that? And he thought for a moment. And then he said, I can't. And then I said, so why have you rejected the Christian faith on the basis of this presupposition that hasn't been borne out in the reality of your experience? Sometimes it's very easy to have an assumption that it's actually very different to what reality is. And so if that's your assumption, can I say, why not actually check out some of the Christians around here? Not just the good-looking Christians, check them all out. And say, look, does following Jesus... does it lead them to have a kind of morally self-righteous attitude or something else? And if it's something else, maybe it's because at the heart of the Christian faith is something that's quite unique and quite different.
I'm only human after all. I'm only human after all. Don't put the blame on me. Don't put the blame on me.